Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Quantify. Today's passage has its theme that is resonating from the shift to race as biology to talking about race as a social construct. And somewhere we are talking about a couple of arguments that are there, whereby there is some sort of an imprecise attribution for genetics, but at the same time, socially, politically necessary for studying a concept like inequality. Let us read the first passage to understand the theme of the author. More than 100 years ago, American sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois was concerned that race was being used as a biological explanation for what he understood to be social and cultural differences between different populations of people. He spoke out against the idea of white and black as discrete groups, claiming that these distinctions ignore the scope of human diversity. Science would favor Du Bois. Today, the mainstream belief among scientists is that race is a social construct without biological meaning, and yet you might still open a study on genetics in a major scientific journal and find categories like white and black being used as variables, biological variables. So basically, what is the first paragraph talking about? It is trying to make a very important claim, whereby the author is trying to say that when you talk about race, it is just a social construct. Social construct का मतलब क्या होता है? It is something that is created by the society. It is not anything that is biological. So basically, race is a social construct as stated by the author. It has got nothing to do with anything that is a biological variable. Yet, ये सब जानने के बावजूद भी अगर आप कोई मेजर साइंटिफिक जर्नल खोलेंगे तो वहां पे आपको दो टर्म्स व्हाइट एंड ब्लैक मिलेंगे जिसको ये लोग कंसिडर करते हैं एज बायोलॉजिकल वेरिएबल. In an article published in the journal Science, four scholars say racial categories are weak proxies for genetic diversity and need to be phased out. They've called on the US National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine to put together a panel of experts across the biological and social sciences to come up with ways for researchers to shift away from racial concept in genetics research. So first three lines are talking about how racial concept should be phased out from genetics. It is a concept we think is too crude, that is too vulgar, too rough to provide useful information. It is a concept that has a social meaning that interferes in the scientific understanding of human genetic diversity. And it is a concept that we are not the first to call upon moving away from, says Michael Udell, a professor of public health at Drexel University in Philadelphia. Udell said that modern genetics research is opening in a paradox, which is that race is understood to be a useful tool to elucidate human diversity, but on the other hand, race is also understood to be a poorly defined marker of that diversity and an imprecise proxy for the relationship between ancestry and genetics. So ये पूरा पैराग्राफ इलैबोरेट किस चीज पे कर रहा है कि रेस एंड साइंस को अलग अलग रखिए. रेस सिर्फ एक सोशल कॉन्स्ट्रक्ट है. रेसिस के बेसिस पे आप एक डिफाइंड मार्कर नहीं निकाल सकते अबाउट द जेनेटिक्स एंड द एंसेस्ट्री अबाउट अ पर्टिकुलर इंडिविजुअल. And then somewhere we've been told about the fact that when you talk about race and genetics, it is like a paradox. It cannot give you a correct information. At the same time, it is considered to be a very useful tool. Assumptions about genetic differences between people of different races have had obvious social and historical repercussions. And they still threaten to fuel racist beliefs. That was apparent 2 years ago when several scientists bristled at the inclusion of the research in Nicholas Waite's controversial book, A Troublesome Inheritance, which proposed that genetic selection has given rise to distinct behavior among different populations. So I may be, let us say that if we are Asians, or for that matter, agar hum ye bole ki chalo, some of them are, when Americans are there, English people are there, since you have adapted yourself in a particular race, in a particular culture, you have developed some sort of a distinct behavior which is different from the other populations, because of which people are basically propagating the fact that genetic selection has actually given rise to different populations. In a letter to the New York Times, 5 researchers wrote that Waite juxtapose is to keep two things together to draw a comparison. when you place things together for comparison, implicit comparison. In an incomplete and inaccurate account of a research in human genetic differences with speculation that recent natural selection has led to worldwide differences in IQ test results, political institutions, and economic development. So he's basically giving us an incomplete information, right? There could be a lot of speculation that I might differ as an Asian, let us say from an American, because my political institutions are different, my economic development is different. What has my race specifically got to do? Udell also said scientists need to get more specific with their language, perhaps using terms like ancestry or population that might more precisely reflect the relationship between humans and their genes on both individual and population level. The researchers also acknowledged that there are few areas where race as a construct might still be used in scientific research as a political, social, but not a biological variable. So the author is reiterating, or this guy Udell is reiterating one fact, that when you talk about genetics, when you talk about race, not genetics rather, when you talk about race, it is nothing biological. It is absolutely a social construct, might be political, but definitely not biological. When we argue phasing out racial terminology in the biological sciences, we also acknowledge that using race as a political or social category to study racism, although filled with lots of challenges, remains necessary given our need to understand how structural inequalities and discrimination produced health disparities between groups. So, since you are discriminating so much using race as a tool, what is ultimately happening? There are a lot of structural inequities and discrimination that are producing some sort of health disparity between groups. So, that is what the summary of the passage is all about, right? Now, coming to the questions, moving on to the second part, that is the questions. Which of the following, if false, would invalidate the claims made by Michael Udell? आपने माइकल यूडेल की आर्ग्यूमेंट को इनवैलिडेट करना है, तो उसकी आर्ग्यूमेंट को हम इनवैलिडेट कैसे करेंगे? हमने उस आंसर चॉइसेस को जो है देखना। ऑप्शन नंबर ए बोलता है, अब यूडेल ने क्या बोला है, उसने एक्सप्लिसिटली स्ट्रेट किया है कि रेस जो है वो सिर्फ एक सोशल या पॉलिटिकल कैटेगरी है, राइट? अगर आपने एक स्ट्रक्चरल इनइक्विटी को देखना है, अगर हमने इस चीज को वीकन करना है तो हम क्या करेंगे? हम इसका ऑपोजिट चूज करेंगे। यही दे रखा है उसने लास्ट पैराग्राफ में। इफ यू लुक एट ऑप्शन नंबर ए, genetic selection has resulted in inherent behavioral or cognitive differences. We are not talking about any sort of a cognitive difference, और ये वैसे भी उसको जो है वीक नहीं कर रहा है, हमने उसकी आर्ग्यूमेंट को कोलैप्स करना है। The concept of race is applicable and needed to understand social disparity. We are talking about the fact that it is ultimately the concept of race which is bringing about a lot of social inequalities or inequities and health disparity. अगर ये क्लेम फॉल्स हो जाए तो उसकी खुद की स्टेटेड जो एक पोजीशन है वो कोलैप्स हो जाए, राइट? क्यों? क्योंकि ये जो है एक्चुअली सपोर्ट करेगी, उसको इनवैलिडेट नहीं करेगी। सो द करेक्ट आंसर वुड बी ऑप्शन नंबर बी. Race is a definitive determinant of an individual's potential for success. We are not talking about success or achievement. Genetic differences between white and black population explain behavior differences. We have been told that these terms are used even in scientific journals, but not to explain behavioral differences. They are used as biological markers and not for behavioral differences. So the correct answer for question number 1 would be option number B. Modern genetics research is operating in a paradox, that is a contradiction. Which one of the following best describes the paradox? अब paradox यहाँ पे क्या बोला है? हम लोगों को passage में paradox के बारे में क्या बोला है कि race is a useful tool that highlights that there is a lot of genetic diversity. At the same time, we are talking about the fact as to how race is a very poorly defined marker. It is an imprecise proxy. If you remember, we did this somewhere here. Right here. So it is elucidating human genetic diversity. At the same time, it is a poorly defined marker of the diversity. So A bolta hai, race is simultaneously seen as valuable for understanding genetic variation, but it is recognized as an imperfect concept. Absolutely correct. Race is simultaneously seen as a reliable tool for unraveling genetic diversity among individuals, but is recognized as a socially constructed concept that ignores the influence of epigenetics. पहली बात तो हम जीन एक्सप्रेशन एंड एपिजेनेटिक्स की कहीं बात ही नहीं कर रहे. दूसरी बात, हमने इस टूल को रिलायबल नहीं करा. Race is simultaneously seen as an essential factor for understanding genetic variation among populations, but is recognized as an oversimplified construct that fails. It is not an oversimplified construct, it is a social construct. ये भी गलत है. Race is simultaneously seen as a useful framework for exploring genetic variation among population, but is recognized as a flawed concept that overlooks the impact of gene-environment interaction out of scope. All new pieces of information are given. So the correct answer would be option number A. Coming to question number 3, the author mentions a book, A Troublesome Inheritance, in order to highlight which of the following. अब troublesome उसका क्यों दिया है? क्योंकि हमारे को इस बुक को इंट्रोड्यूस किया है after the statement where we are talking about assumptions about genetic differences between people of different races have had obvious social and historical repercussions. और ये चीज जो है apparent थी एक particular किताब, right? तो ये as an illustration का example, मतलब as इसको illustration के तौर पे जो है इस्तेमाल किया गया. So if you look at option number A, कि ये वैलिडेट नहीं कर रहे वेड की थीसिस को, बट ये क्या कर रहे हैं, ये सिर्फ एग्जाम्प्लीफाई कर रहे हैं to elucidate that there might be some cases where genetic selections create distinct behaviors among diverse population. We are just talking about obvious social and historical repercussions, right? That would threaten the racist belief. We are not talking about creating distinct behavior among diverse population. To illustrate that the view of race as a social construct without biological meaning is not a universal view. अब ये हो सकता है, but again कहीं ना कहीं ये हम बोल रहे हैं कि it still threatens the racist belief. So we are not talking from the point of view of a scientist, but we are talking about a belief system, about genetic disparity that was there, and किस तरह से वो racist beliefs को fuel कर सकता है, trigger कर सकता है. ये तो यहाँ पे नहीं है. To explain that the IQ differences in IQ results, political institutions, and economic development are important areas of study. General statement, important areas of study with regards to what? To highlight that making assumption about genetic disparity between races can potentially perpetuate racial prejudice. Absolutely correct, because if that prejudice is triggered, it is going to have some sort of social and historical repercussion, because it is going to threaten to fuel, that is to instigate racist beliefs. So the correct answer for this question would be option number D. Coming to the last question, it is an inference question and an except question type. It can be inferred from the passage that Udell would agree with each of the following except. अब Udell ने क्या बोला है कि पॉलिटिकल एंड सोशल कैटेगरी स्टडी करने के लिए रेसिज्म को ठीक है, लेकिन वो कहीं पे भी आपका एक बायोलॉजिकल मार्कर नहीं. एक्सेप्ट वाला हमें करना है. इट्स करंट साइंटिफिक टर्मिनोलॉजी इज इनएडिक्वेट एंड इज एक्यूरेटली capturing the nuances of human genetic diversity. So we have been told कि scientific terminology white and black है, हमें उसे change करने की जरूरत है, right? क्योंकि वो accurately जो है नहीं कर पा रहा है, it is inaccurate. So one तो निकल सकता है inference. Race is a construct with limited accuracy and imprecise proxy. Absolutely correct. ये भी दे रखा है तो ये भी नहीं हो सकता. There is importance in comprehending how structural inequalities contribute to health disparity. Last paragraph पूरा बात ही इस चीज के बारे में कर रहा है, structural and discrimination के बारे में. There is no potential benefit in undertaking scientific research that evaluate the impact of race as a construct. This is going to be the correct answer, because we cannot infer कि वो invalidate कर रहा है पूरी future course of action या study, right? So this passage, even though it was pretty scientific, it did have one very specific concept that was revolving around genetics, and when we are talking about something as a particular marker of a biological variant. Even though certain terms are very technical, nevertheless, you just need to understand what is the central idea or probably the core that the author is resonating around. So that's about it for today. I'll see you in some interesting session again. Thank you, and keep reading and keep putting in best of your efforts now.